Foreword. Before we get to the book, let me begin by saying the William Bruce Adventure series are not history books. They are, however, historical novels based on the people, places, events, and dates surrounding the life and times of my seventh great-grandfather. That said, here is your warning. I will, for the sake of context, be godsmacking you with historical information in the prologue. I figured I would get that out of the way so we can move on to the fun part, the story. And with that, away we go. Prologue. Before William Bruce. In the greatest story ever told, the book of Genesis speaks of how God made a covenant with Abraham, saying his seed would form a multitude of nations. Then, in the book of James, the story is told of how the 12 tribes, which were descendants of Abraham, dispersed abroad. As per God's promise, a nation was formed under Abraham's descendants, King David, and later his son King Solomon. Upon Solomon's death, the great nation divided, forming 2 tribes. The northern tribe known as the House of Israel, and the southern tribe known as the House of Judah. In the year 700 AD, the Assyrians uprooted the House of Israel, driving them from the Holy Land. Across the Caucasus Mountains they fled into various regions of Europe. This is where the term Caucasian was coined. It referred to those who crossed the Caucasus during this exodus. Evidence that some of those Caucasian tribes settled in Scotland is found in that country's most precious possession, the Scottish Declaration of Independence. This document, which is still held dear by the Scottish people, was written by King Robert the Bruce and 25 Scottish noblemen in the year 1320. It states, "We know, most holy Father and Lord, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients gather, that among other illustrious nations, ours to wit, the nation of Scots, has been distinguished by many honours, which passing from the greater Scythia through the Mediterranean Sea and Pillars of Hercules, and sojourning in Spain among most savage tribes through a long course of time, could nowhere be subjugated by any people however barbarous, and coming hence 1,200 years after the outgoing of the people of Israel, they by many victories and infinite toil acquired for themselves the possessions in the West which they now hold. In their kingdom 113 kings of their own royal stock, no stranger intervening, have reigned. For so long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be subjected to the lordship of the English. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honours that we are fighting, but for freedom alone, which no honest man gives up but with life itself." As you can see, this document asserts the Scots, who had the Stone of Destiny, are descendants of the ancient people of Israel. People whom archaeology has established became the Scythians and the Cimmerians of history, whose origins had for so long been a mystery. Lost to their true identity as foretold in the Scriptures, the Israelites migrated to their appointed place. Some crossed Europe by land, others by ships through the Mediterranean to the coastlands of Europe and the Isles of the West. The Scots claim ancestry to the branch of Cimmerians that dwelt in Spain for a period, including at Zaragoza, stronghold fortress of Zara, now called Zaragoza, and eventually they arrived on the island shores of Britain. They also claim their royal line of kings has remained unbroken through their migration. King Robert the Bruce of Scotland and his brother, King Edward the Bruce, who ruled concurrently over Ireland, I am proud to say are my great-uncle and great-grandfather several generations removed. But long before Robert the Bruce united the Scottish clans, One clan stood above all others and ruled Scotland and parts of Ireland with an iron fist for generations. The Scottish Highlands, 10th century. A young man kneels upon a boulder protruding from the plush green rolling hills. He is tall, strong, proud, and with purpose. He is MacAlpin, royalty among the Scottish clans. The air is cool, crisp, and clean. Before him, a herd of Highland cattle. With their long, flowing hair and sweeping horns, they graze upon the green blanketing the hillside. Alertly, he watches over them as his ancestors have done for centuries. The MacAlpin clan. The MacAlpin clan is the most ancient of the Scottish Highlands. This Celtic clan, royal among Scots, saw their lineage serve as Scottish kings for 25 generations under the House of Alpin. During the clan's era, their colors were easily identified by their royal family crest, which proudly displayed a boar's head symbolizing their fearlessness and difficulty to be killed in battle. While in battle, their war cry, Cumric Bas Alpin, remember the death of Alpin, induced fear into the hearts of their enemies. The cry pays homage to King Kenneth MacAlpin. Kenneth MacAlpin was the son of Alpin Dungal, or King Alpin II, who is regarded as the son of the founder and king of Dalriada, an ancient kingdom that included medieval Scotland, Kintry, and portions of Northern Ireland. Born in 778 AD, he succeeded his father as king of Dalriada in January of 834 AD. As a warrior king, Alpin II had to fight in many battles to retain his throne, doing so against the Anglo-Saxons, Scandinavians, and even his own people. Known as the King of the Picts and Scots, as well as King of Dalriada, he reigned until his death in 840 while battling his Pict cousins in Galloway, Dumfriesshire, Scotland. Ironically, as great a warrior as King Alpin II was, his most notable feat was likely his marriage to a Pict princess. For under Pict law, succession to the throne went through the female line. Thus, as the son of a Scottish king and Pict princess, Kenneth MacAlpin was able to unite the Gaels and Picts and defend their lands against invading Viking raiders, the unification of which led him to found the United Kingdom of Alba, or Scotia, and in doing so became the first King of Scotland. King Kenneth MacAlpin I ascended to the throne and reigned until his death in 859 at Fordevoit, Perthshire, Scotland. He would be the first in a long line of MacAlpin kings. History also shows that Kenneth I is the 33rd great-grandfather of Queen Elizabeth II. The MacAlpin clan's traditional home was Dunstafnage, near Oban, Argyll. History shows the 7 greatest clans of Scotland, or the Soil Alpin, originally created this ancient royal clan. It was comprised of the MacGregor, Macaulay, MacPhee, MacKinnon, MacNab, Grant, and Macquarie clans, their motto being Ethriolgal Modron, meaning Royal is my race. Tragically, despite the MacAlpin clan's contributions to Scottish history, Scottish governments have for centuries refused to acknowledge the MacAlpin clan or officially record their proud coat of arms or royal pedigree. Hence, the legendary heritage of this once great clan had until recently been relegated to revered Scottish lore, vague traditions, and a smattering of historical references. Not until April 19, 2017, was the Clan MacAlpin finally and rightfully officially recognized and commissioned by the Court of the Honourable Lord Lyon in Edinburgh, Scotland. After 25 generations of Scottish rule, the MacAlpin clan ultimately falls out of power. It is then Let a family of clansmen flee their beloved Scotland for safer pastures. To maintain their heritage while providing safety through secrecy, they changed their surname, merging Albanium, the Latinized Gaelic name for Scotland, with their MacAlpin clan name. They adopt the surname Alban. Under their new moniker, they flee Scotland to begin anew. Central England, 11th century. In the 11th century, the Albans make their way to the heart of England, 3 miles northwest of Derby. Set amongst 4 country roads near the healing waters of Markeaton Brook, they find the small farming village of Quarndon and its 800 rolling acres of grassland. Living secretly under their new surname, they and their neighbors build England's Amber Valley district at the southern end of Derbyshire into a thriving farming community. Its flourishing fields producing picturesque landscapes that rise and fall in waves of green and splashes of color from one end of the village to the other. Once simultaneously owned by King Edward and William the Conqueror in 1066, the peaceful village is covered by footpaths, pastures, and woodland hills. It is arguably one of England's most beautiful places. There, the Albans heal from their wounds of the past, calling it home for the next many centuries. Alban Farm, outskirts of Quarndon, a mile east of the River Derwent, England, a fall evening, 1642. 22-year-old Robert has spent the last 5 years studying at Oxford University. He recently returned home to reunite with his very pregnant wife of 1 year. His wife, 22-year-old Sarah Cansey of the House of Blackburn, has been staying with Robert's family on their farm in Quarndon these past many months. Patriarch and soon-to-be great-grandfather, 67-year-old William David Alban, sits in a rocking chair, his thin gray hair swaying to and fro as he rocks forward and back. He and his 42-year-old son, John Willamie, watch patiently as Robert, John Willamie's son, nervously dog-trots the living room. Professorial in appearance, with his short, clean-cut light brown hair and spectacles, Robert looks like a teacher pacing a classroom, heel marks on the floorboards tracking his steps from one end of the room to the other. Nervously pacing, he stops every now and again to glance at the clock ticking on the wall across the room. Like the watched pot that never boils, the 3 men wonder if Robert's child will ever arrive. Meanwhile, in her 7th hour of labor, an exhausted and sweaty Sarah Cansey lays on a bed in the back room. Caring for her is Elizabeth Ann Alban, or Annie, as everyone calls her. She is not only Robert's mother, but the village midwife as well. Still rocking, William David peers at his grandson with a raised brow, his bushy white caterpillar catching Robert's attention and bringing him to a stop. "Your great-grandfather Thomas would be proud," he says with a wink. Although exhausted, Robert's weary brown eyes manage a half-smile and he nods. "I'm sure he would." William David nods back, then returns to his thoughts, while Robert returns to his pacing. With the future of the family at stake, the 3 men ponder the outcome of what it could mean for the family moving forward. Each, however, quickly concluding to ponder such things is tomfoolery. For at this point, there is simply nothing more they can do. No, from here on out, this is between Sarah and the Almighty himself. Standing nearby with arms crossed, John Willamie leans against a wall across the room. With his head down, he quietly puffs his pipe while secretly peering at his son. Like Robert, his patients are nearing their end, for news of his first grandchild's birth cannot come soon enough. Lost in his thoughts, he remembers when he himself, at the ripe old age of 20, was awaiting the arrival of his first child. Thinking of how Robert reminds him of himself, he returns his gaze to the floor, smiling. This is especially true considering Robert, like he and his father before him, were each the last and only living son to carry forward the family bloodline. In each of their lifetimes, they had all been the family's last hope for passing their name to the next generation. His mind drifts as he shifts his glance to the ceiling, wondering if this child will be the one. For if this child is not a male, their name, their bloodline, their story draws one step closer to disintegrating into the soil like so many fallen trees. Suddenly, Annie emerges from their daughter-in-law's room. As she enters, the men turn to her on bated breath. With her warm, glowing smile and joyful demeanor, she brings a long-awaited sigh of relief and some much-needed excitement into the room. Nervously, Robert asks, "So?" Smiling jubilantly, she proudly gazes at him from across the room and replies, "Go, your beloved has something to show you." Sighing, Robert releases the tension in his shoulders, letting them relax. Excitedly, he rushes over, planting a grateful kiss on his mother's cheek before hurrying into the back room. As he scurries away, Annie turns to her husband, who asks, "Well?" Scrunching her neck and shoulders, she begins dancing from one leg to the other, and giddily replies, "We've a grandson!" Then waving her fingers, she adds, "10 fingers and toes!" Standing tall and proud, John Willamette stares in the direction of Sarah's room, smiling. Letting out a huge sigh of relief, he places his hands on Annie's arms, gently kissing her forehead. With a proud smile, he peers at his father and hollers, "Praise God! I have a grandson!" William David pumps his fist, then watches as his son rushes to join Robert in Sarah's room. As Robert enters, Sarah is laying on the bed, disheveled and spent, her chestnut hair wet and matted, her porcelain face red and beaded with sweat. Nevertheless, with their newborn son cradled upon her bosom, she is glowing. Exhausted and weak, she nudges the lad across her body to the waiting hands of her elated husband. Robert takes him, cradling him in his muscular arms against the broad chest of his 6-foot 2-inch frame. In awe, he turns to his parents and grandfather as they enter the room. Proudly, he lifts the boy into the air, exclaiming, "We shall call him James, son of Robert, grandson of John Willamette, and great-grandson of William David." Wiping a tear, William David adds, "And great-great-grandson of my father, Thomas, whom I wish were here to behold this moment. Well done, Robert. You've done us proud." Alban Family Farm, Quarndon, a mile east of the River Derwent, England, 8 years later, spring 1650. In light of the fact that all of Robert's 4 siblings, Anne, Elizabeth, William, and John, had died in infancy, coupled with the unfortunate reality that he and Sarah's first son would be their only child to survive infancy, the future of the Alban family fell solely on the shoulders of young James. As such, he is showered with attention. Through the years, his parents and grandparents invest every ounce of their being into sharing their knowledge with him. His father, an Oxford man, teaches him the gift of reading, writing, and the power of words, while his grandfather and great-grandfather teach him about the land, the animals, and hunting and fishing. And most importantly, his mother teaches him to be compassionate, loving, and understanding. In the heart of the king's countryside, James spends his childhood learning about life and the world around him. Joyfully, William David shares the first 8 years of James' life with him, the last 5 of which he patiently imparts a lifetime of wisdom to young James, wisdom that will mold him into the man he will later become. Through his teachings, James learns about trial and error, success and failure, and the power of grit and determination. When he is 7, the Yeoman family, Bartholomew, his wife Elizabeth Sharp, and their daughter, Anne Margaret, move on to the adjacent farm. Despite Anne being 4 years his junior, with so few children living nearby, she and James become fast friends. During the first year of their friendship, much of their time together is chaperoned by James's great-grandfather, William David. During this time, he tells them stories and teaches them about the land and nature. Sadly, those lessons end when William David passes away in 1650 at the age of 75. On this cold, foggy morning, 8-year-old James stands over his great-grandfather's grave, tearfully watching as shovels of dirt splash upon his casket. In that moment, his mentor imparts one final lesson. The world can change in the blink of an eye.